All right. It has come time. I can't believe it. We're letting in our last guest who's joining us. I'm going to introduce him when he comes in because I want to make sure he gets in okay. There we go. Let's wait for the audio to connect. There we go. Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Jeff.
It's Jeff Corwin on
That's right.
Global BioFest. How are you, Jeff? Paul Rose.
Doing great, guys. Doing great.
Thank you very much for joining. It's a great finish for us.
My pleasure.
Well, Jeff, I don't know if you need an introduction, but I'm going to give one anyways for people who are tuning in. We've got Jeff Corwin joining us, biologist, wildlife conservationist, known to many in over 100 countries around the world as the host of award-winning wildlife series like Ocean Mysteries with Jeff Corwin, Animal Planet's Jeff Corwin Experience, Corwin's Quest, lots of popular shows on networks like Disney, Discovery, Travel Channel, Food Network, and you really dedicated your life to educating and entertaining audiences with your knowledge and really instilling a deep sense of caring for our natural world. So Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. The final session of the Global Biodiversity Festival, and so last minute, jumping in this morning, agreeing to join us. It's a real pleasure to have you joining us today.
Glad to do it.
All right. Well, let's start off right away, Jeff. I would love, you've traveled the world. You've seen so much. You've seen the good, you've seen the bad. I'd love to have your perspective about biodiversity right now.
Well, I think we face incredible challenges when it comes to our natural legacy for our planet. The wild species and wild places have never been under such a great level of threat. We lose a species every half an hour, disappears on our planet. We have a massive species loss, greater now than when dinosaurs were wiped out 60-something million years ago, except back then it was an asteroid. And today we realize that we are the asteroid through poor sustainability, through habitat loss, through the black market wildlife trade, through climate change, through pollution. As we all know from plastics, we put probably 10 billion pounds of plastic globally into the waters every year. All of this adds up, which pushes species to the brink. And I think what's been interesting about this COVID pandemic is that it reminds us two things: that we fall prey to all the pluses and minuses of being a biological creature. Biology doesn't look at human being and say, oh, you're extra special. We're gonna do something little fair for you. We're gonna give you a little extra edge. Biology and ecology and nature is not about being kind or fair or being equivalent. It's just about being in that moment. And in this moment, we realize that because of poor sustainability, we have, which we've done before with zoonotic diseases, have tapped into a species that has wreaked havoc on our species. And what's interesting is that it's very likely that our connection to COVID-19 came about through habitat loss, the pressure of a species like either a bat or something similar to that, which causes disease to transform to us. So that's kind of the negative from this. The positive is that it has caused us to take our feet off the planetary gas pedal, right? We're burning less fossil fuels. We're out having we're more in and less out, having a more positive impact on the planet by just not connecting to the planet. And we have discovered that nature is incredibly resilient, and it's bounced back remarkably. We're seeing wild species overtake urban ecosystems around the world. You can go down in India and big urban capitals, and you can see the Himalayas for the first time in half a century. So I think there's powerful lessons that remind us of how vulnerable we are, but also the rapid rewards we could be paid through good sustainability.
Absolutely, Jeff. I couldn't have summed that up better myself. That's a great description of what we have going on right now. Jeff, I want to introduce very briefly the other two who are joining us in the call. Paul Rose, legendary explorer, expedition leader of pristine seas. And we've got Dan Klein joining us as well, chief data officer at Valtech and UN lead of big data working group for environmental data. So guys, feel free to jump in with a question, with a thought. Yeah.
Jeff, I've got a question for you, if I may. You're such a great communicator, and you've got a terrific, influential network. I'm just wondering what your message should be right now in the immediate sense. I think long term, I'm very optimistic. We're on the headlines of all the newspapers, even the terrible newspapers, with this message that the only certain way to prevent a future pandemic, the only way to have a true vaccine is to protect nature and, protect what we have, restore what's been damaged, and then reset our values so we don't do it again. And we know that a short-term answer that scientists, fingers crossed, are going to find us a vaccine and healthcare. And the long-term, people believe in that long-term message. But I'm getting a bit twitchy. I'm an eternal optimist, but I'm getting a bit twitchy that there's a big pressure to jumpstart the economy almost at any cost. People are bumping along the bottom financially, maybe have lost jobs. I mean, they need immediate answers. And so I think some of these headlines that are beginning to pop up about, let's jumpstart the economy, let's do everything we can to get people back into work, are at the cost of protecting biodiversity and environment, and all the progress that we've made through people like me, a lifetime of work. So I'm just wondering, what is the message? What is the headline that we can offer to people who want to protect biodiversity, but need something now? What is that short-term headline? I keep thinking of long headlines. I can't come up with a short one. I've got this thing that, for the first time in history, we've realized that our health relies on everybody else's health, which in turn relies on the health of nature, things like that. But I'm struggling to help come up with this headline. If you've got anything that occurs to you right now, let's have it. If not, just email us with it.
Well, I think what we're learning, the big lesson here is by saving nature, we save ourselves, because these are resources that we depend upon. All of us have traveled around the world. Last year, I went to, I think, to 22 countries. I've been to India many, many times. I've been to places around the world where you've seen a tremendous effort to manage wildlife and habitat in an appropriate way. And I've seen and experienced places where wildlife and habitat has been remarkably compromised, and the ecology is broken where the people live. And the biggest discovery I've made is that, I'm sure all of us have witnessed this, in areas where you have a rich tableau of well-managed habitat, you find human culture that tends to be more stable. There is a qualitative versus quantitative way of looking at life, about families and members and connecting to resources, the value of everything from a pet to women and girls and children within that society. The exact opposite of that, if you go to a place where the environment is broken, you often find the culture is broken. You find human rights have its lowest level. The mortality rates are higher amongst children and women. The rights, civil rights, all of these quality of life checks in the boxes have been erased. So in the end, the lesson is by protecting nature, we secure our own survival. And I believe if you look at societies, even in parts of the United States where children don't have access to nature, nature is the way the inner scientist in all of us that we use to problem solve. This is how we exercise and stretch those innate scientific muscles that make us uniquely human. And nature, skinning the knee, turning the rock, looking through the magnifying glass, checking the frog net from the creek. These are things that explorers have been doing for millennia. It's hardwired in who we are. And when you find children who don't have access to that rely solely on technology and social media and digital media, which is incredibly valuable and a powerful tool in its own right. But when those children and people aren't allowed access to nature, they pay a price. So uniquely in America, we always looked at how the goal of success was the next generation lives a little longer, has better health, better economics, better education. Well, for the first time in American culture in the United States, we have a generation that will live less, be fatter, be slower, have more behavioral issues. And I believe that that has to do with not having a connection to nature. When I say fatter, it's not necessarily about being what you look like or anything like that. It's just we have a generation today where children and society is physically less healthier, more prone to diabetes and other diseases. And I believe our disconnect to nature is a part of that. And in the end, if we want to protect our world, you can't protect what you do not love, and you'll never love it if you don't get to meet it. And that's why it's so important to connect children to science, nature, and to the outdoors.
Great stuff, Jeff. Yeah, thank you. And it, you know, someone like you with the big reach and the availability to get into people's, you know, homes with your television programs. And I've seen your stuff on the news recently too, which I thought was great, the Alaska stuff. So, you know, that's the kind of stuff we really need, I think. People, not everybody will listen to a deep, complex piece of science work necessarily, but they'll certainly listen to people like you getting into their homes. So thanks very much, Jeff.
Actually, Paul, can I ask a related question, Jeff? Given the narrative in the press around not believing the science these days, and your background, our background, if you like, how do you in your role counter that narrative which says that we shouldn't believe the data and we shouldn't believe the science? How do we get around that problem?
I think it's it's terrifying today that in the early part of the 21st century, with such a remarkable access to technology and innovation, technovation, that we have culturally decided to ostrich our heads into the shadows of the sand. And we have noticed this trend where because I want to think the earth is flat, it must be flat. I will now challenge all these scientific things because I can find something in social media. I can find my own choir that will sing to exactly the song I want to hear. So people can get validation with erroneous materials. It's remarkable. I mean, people that I know that I've had long-term friendships with will bring stuff to me and I'm like, are you serious? Do you really think, you know, they fall prey to these things because they want to believe versus not looking at the evidence. And this is because we have lacked leadership, not just in the United States, but in many of the capitals around the world where we relied on leadership between the science community and the government. That has been broken in the US. But in the end, that's all of our responsibilities. The problem we see today where there's a lack of a sense of integrity in the scientific rigors of what we used to have, that's not just the top of the triangle fault. We've all allowed that to happen. We've allowed that to happen with how we've voted or have not voted and how we participate civically and politically. So that's the wake up moment. So what's the price we pay when we choose not to believe science, when we choose not to believe the data? Well, I would have told you the price we paid 3 months ago is this species will fall prey to extinction. Climate change will happen like this. Well, I will now can say, I think we can all say that because we no longer steer towards the time-tested scientific model as the way we use information and apply data to our lives, because we're no longer believing in that as much, our species now pays the price because we can fall prey to thinking of unscientifically validated theories or ideas that light can fix a disease from the outside in, or all of these things that if I'd mentioned them to you last year, you would have thought I would have been crazy. But now crazy has replaced science.
So are you putting Homo sapien on the endangered list? Is that what you're saying?
I don't think Homo sapien, I mean, I think in the end, science and smart thinking and rational thinking will prevail. I think we are in a very weird blippy moment on the radar screen, and we just need to survive in the short term. I think in the long term, I think we're now discovering what ignorance, what willful negligence and wanton ignorance, what we reap from that. And we can see that not only does it have an environmental impact, a socio-cultural impact, but it also can have a very powerful impact on our own individual survival as a people. So I think we can learn from that. I think science can learn from that to make sure that information is presented in a accessible and digestible way. You know, I remember when I was a grad student, I always struggled with scientific journals. I never enjoyed reading them. I didn't like when I had those rare moments to be published in one. And I think there is a failure there, because the truth is scientific information is very important for scientists, but it really is even more important for mainstream communities who can have that data presented to them in a way where they can make real world everyday applications in their lives. That's when science is transformative.
Yeah. Jeff, I want to bring in our audience, because we have obviously people tuning in live right now. We have Sophia tuning in live. And a big goal of this festival is to obviously share the amazing variety of life on our planet, to share the challenges, but to share some good news stories as well. So Sophia would like to know, how can we give more people some of these life-changing experiences in the natural world? So I want to frame it a little differently, in that you've traveled all around the world. What's an example of maybe a conservation organization that's just got it right, is doing an amazing job engaging people with the natural world?
Well, I mean, that's the great news is, and I really should, you know, all of this stuff we're talking about, the doom and gloom reality check of where we are in the world, is softened significantly by the many thousands of people, actually millions of people and thousands of projects around the world that do make a difference. And we've been here before. This is not our first pandemic. It's not our first rodeo with animals pushed to the brink. And there are many places in the world where the environments are healthier and are more robust than they were. Bald eagles today in the lower 48, there's 20, probably 30,000 pair of bald eagles. 30 years ago, there was only 600 pair in the lower 48. There's more woodland habitat in New England today than there was during the colonial period. There's the waters in my backyard, the ocean is cleaner now where I live in my community than it was during industrial periods of our country's history. There are many, many organizations that do great things. I was just working in New Zealand with endangered birds and looking at these local folks that have took it upon themselves to try to restore and recover species that have been pushed to the brink and are seeing success. It's through that painful realization of causing extinction that we can then allow that be the necessity for the mother of invention to save a species. But I think Defenders of Wildlife is doing great stuff. Ducks Unlimited in the United States, it's a sports person's organization, but they've locked up millions of acres of wetlands habitat locally. And I always say, find that place that specializes in your backyard and your connected community resource, and let that be the stepping stone. But there's so many examples. Today, you can go outside and see white-tailed deer and eastern turkey. These animals were non-existent in the United States and only in low populations, and today are thriving. American alligators on the brink of extinction. Today, they're a very robust recovered species. That's actually a resource again. So with all the doom and gloom, there's also great power and positivity of success.
Great to hear you say that, Jeff. It's one of the things we've done is we've tried to sort of look at where we are, and before we move forward, let's celebrate the good work going on at the front line. So we've had, 65 speakers from Frontline of Science, big big organizations, small one-person organizations all over the world, trying to celebrate that work that's going on in the front line there. And to connect with you, we connect with a different version of the front line, and that's communicating from a scientific perspective. So we've done a good thing, I think. Before, like you say, before any big trip, what's the first thing you do? You celebrate that you've done all the planning before you go on the big trip. So it's like a pre-expedition party to celebrate what we've done.
And you know, I can tell you that in my career, my 25-year career of hosting TV shows and being a biologist, I consider myself a naturalist, and getting to work with hands-on conservationists in my own little bits of work that I've done. I mean, there are species that in my career that were on the brink that have recovered, and I've been able to follow them. You know, I'll never forget the story, but if you ever think it's over, and the idea of it ain't over till it's over, the black-footed ferret, this is a species that actually became extinct. The door was closed in the black-footed ferret in the 1970s. This is North America's only true ferret species. And lo and behold, a dog in Wyoming of a rancher found a dead black-footed ferret and dropped it on this rancher's doorstep. And he could have done a lot of things. He could have just ignored it. Many of his neighbors were like, we don't want federal Fish and Wildlife helping us manage our livestock and landscape. But he went to the Fish and Wildlife Office and brought him this black-footed ferret. And they went to his property. They found the last surviving colony of black-footed ferrets, 100 animals. They discovered these black-footed ferret, and within 2 weeks of discovery, you know, the irony is that they were exposed to plague, or maybe it was distemper, and about 80 of them died. So there was about less than 20 of them. And I remember filming them for my very first TV series on Disney 25 years ago. And it looked very uncertain and very glass half empty look to it. Cut to many years later with my daughter, who's now 16, when she was 3 years old, in Wind Cave National Park in South Dakota, opening up a little habit trap door with 14 other people and releasing 14 black-footed ferrets back into this national park. 14 of 2,000 living black-footed ferrets in the wild from this program, from a species that became extinct. It's like the ultimate Lazarus of nature. So even when you think it's over, sometimes nature will surprise you.
Amazing.
Well said, Jeff. Thank you, sir.
Jeff, I'm very cognizant of your time, being a Sunday and jumping in last minute. I'd like to just maybe wrap with one more small question for you, and something we've asked a lot of our speakers. Is there a time where you were out, you were in the field in a wild place, and you had one of those pinch me moments where it's just, I cannot believe this is happening? An experience you always go back to in the wild, experiencing biodiversity.
You know, there've been many. I mean, I think being there, I remember one time I was in Nepal with a young herpetologist, and I love herpetology. Snakes and reptiles and amphibians are my passion. They still are. I still get excited if I see a garter snake, as much as I do if I see a 20-foot anaconda. And I was there when a scientist, this young man, discovered a new genus of frog. And that was a once in a 10-year thing for a taxonomist. But I think my greatest memory was helping a USGS scientist radio collar polar bear. And he was testing to see the presence of heavy metals and how climate change was changing the species. And it was this visceral, your heart was so warm from the experience, even though it was minus 40 degrees outside. And you're just on this empty, expansive ice with a helicopter and 3 polar bears, the sow and her 2 cubs. And I remember he asked me if I wanted to try polar bear milk. And I said, I will probably, there'll be many things I will eat in my life, but I will never, ever get a chance to try polar bear milk. And I got to taste polar bear milk. And it was not just to be silly or foolish, but he wanted me to see why this milk is so important. And you could literally, why the polar bear's milk is the richest, people don't realize, one of the richest of all mammals' milks, like 70% fat from all the sea mammals that they eat. And it's just a moment that I always think about. It's like, how many people that day were radio collaring a polar bear and finished it off with a little sip of polar bear milk, something I'll never forget.
I mean,
Great.
absolutely incredible. What an experience, Jeff. And, I think I speak for all of us here. The message you just delivered to us in this short period of time, what you shared with us, really neatly summed up everything that we've done this weekend, from bouncing around the world, having over 60 countries joining in. You really put things into perspective. Biodiversity is so important to our survival, but it's not, all hope is not lost. There's so much good news happening as well. We just can't take our eye off of it, off the target.
Absolutely. Still hope.
Thanks for joining us, Jeff.
Thank you.
Fantastic,
My pleasure.
sir. Keep up the great work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Jeff.
See you, sir.
Okay, well, that was pretty good. That was pretty awesome.
It was nice getting Jeff in. Thank you. Great idea.
So I've just shot a message to Jesse to see if he can jump in and join us for a minute. But I thought it would be fun just to wrap up for a few minutes while we're all together. People behind the scenes, people in front of the cameras. And I think we should chat a little bit to our audience before we sign off for today.
Fantastic.
Well, you guys, have you realised that it's getting dark? Clearly, you've clocked it's getting quite dark here now. And it's really interesting watching the camera start to lose itself as the night sky starts to come in.
Well, I've had a lot of fun in these later few hours going through some of the earlier sessions and going through some of the outline analytics that you've pulled together, Dan, and beginning to understand the reach that we've had. It's really great for me, old friends like Gladys, who gave us the coffee, and we worked together on the Rolex and National Geographic projects and such, and seeing her great work reaching so many people. Andy, who I know in Costa Rica, and all these others, and some whose work I knew, but were, maybe names. I've heard about that project, or my dear friend Nigel Windsor told me about this project. And suddenly to pull them all together, I think, given the numbers involved and the geographical reach involved and the range of thematic talks and opinions, I feel this is, a bit of a world's first to give sort of a global voice to, all these opinions and thoughts. It's a bit like a sort of global snapshot of the condition of biodiversity from the people that matter. It's not the headline writers, it's not the politicians. This is the frontline conservation field science teams and staff, and it's their voice captured properly, instantly, and quickly. And I think it's a beautiful thing, and it's been great to sort of be a part of this, but also have the moment to step back and listen to these voices from the front line of conservation, telling the world, here it is. It's a global snapshot of biodiversity, and it's such a unique experience, but wonderful.
Absolutely. I cannot believe we broadcast for over 30 hours live to the world this weekend. Dan, it's so great to have you on camera. You've been behind the scenes so much of the time, keeping us on track and thinking of things we didn't even dream of until a few days ago. So, I mean, can't thank you enough.
To be fair, Joe, I'm not sure I dreamed of them until a few days ago either.
Absolutely. And then Paul from, not that long ago when I called you and said, Paul, I have an idea. What do you think? And you jumped in with both feet and ran with me for the last few weeks. And it's, wow, what an experience.
Been terrific. Thanks very much. Kat, I'm just wondering what we should do next. We should ask the audience. What do you think? We've survived this one. It's been a good success. We've given voice to lots of terrific projects. So I think it'd be wonderful if we can get some guidance and advice from you as to what we should tackle next.
Yeah. Everybody out there needs to tell us on Twitter and Instagram what's our next virtual expedition, isn't it?
There you go.
Oh, you're the expedition leader. This is what is the next? And given COVID, what is the next virtual expedition? And if everybody out there can tell us, we can work it out, can't we?
Great. I'll start firing it around.
Absolutely. I do want to make sure that we just give a shout out to Wes Delavola and Jesse Hildebrand. Jesse, the other half of Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, for just being amazing all weekend long. Again, keeping track of things behind the scenes, jumping in and hosting. Yeah, couldn't have done it without those guys joining in as well. And just one more shout out to the 65 plus scientists, explorers, conservationists, policymakers, photographers, filmmakers from all around the world on the front lines of biodiversity, who shared their wonder, right? Their passion for life and biodiversity, who shared the challenges that they face, but they also shared good news. They shared what they see and what gives them hope. So a shout out to all of them. All right. Well, I think we've reached our stage. I think it's time to hit stop broadcast one last time. Paul, Dan, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody out there. All the videos are coming soon, I promise. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Fantastic.